Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and today we are going to go through a detailed forecast for Q4 delivery and production numbers for Tesla. The reason we're doing this today is because we finally have a critical piece of information that can help inform this forecast, and that is Gigafactory Shanghai production numbers from the China Passenger Car Association. So earlier this week we had talked about the Model 3 sales numbers in China for October, but we didn't yet have the production numbers. Those have now been released by the CPCA, and they are very strong, I think even better than the most bullish of forecasts that I have seen. So October production out of Gigafactory Shanghai was reported to be 22,929 Model 3s. So to put the context around just how strong that number is, let's hop into my forecasting spreadsheet. If you haven't seen this yet, just to orientate you, each row is a different period of time, and then in each grouping of columns here, I have production numbers. So I have total production, Fremont production, Shanghai production, and then I break that down to a weekly level and a daily level. Those production rates on a weekly and daily level are incredibly important because sometimes Tesla has known downtime. So looking at monthly or quarterly production doesn't really give us the full picture that weekly or daily does. And then on the color scheme here, gray numbers are known. Those have been reported by Tesla or figured out by us with high confidence. Orange numbers are also high confidence but are based off of reports out of China. Blue numbers are estimates that kind of fill in the gaps between the two, and then yellow are future forecasts. All right, so getting back to the Shanghai numbers then, if we look at October, that 22,929 production number divided over the 4.4 weeks in October yields a weekly production rate of 5,178 Model 3s per week from Shanghai. This is much greater than the 2,850 produced each week over the course of Q3. However, if we flip back to September, we actually got a bit of a hint that numbers like this were on the way from Tesla. So total September, Tesla only produced about 12,200 vehicles. That was actually down slightly from August and July. But what people may have missed is that Tesla actually had shut down Gigafactory Shanghai from September 20th to September 30th. So if you take those days out, Tesla actually produced about 4,500 Model 3s per week in September over the 2.7 production weeks where they weren't shut down. So it looked like Tesla was kind of leveling off production at about 12,000 per month, but actually they took a huge step forward in September in terms of that production rate. We see that then continue into October and even accelerate, while the monthly production takes a massive step forward from 12,000 all the way up to almost 23,000 because there was no downtime in October. So this production rate, almost 5,200 per week in October, has huge implications for the balance of Q4. If we even just extrapolate that rate that Tesla is at now, that ends up being 68,000 Model 3s produced from Shanghai in Q4. There are a few reasons we've seen this massive jump in production rate from Shanghai. First off, they've obviously just ramped up their production rate. One of the ways they've been able to do that, though, is by adding another shift to Shanghai. Depending on what estimate you're looking at, that seems to have added about 30 to 50% of production hours from employees. So that's filled out the production capacity. And then we have also seen Tesla start utilizing the lithium iron phosphate batteries from CATL. And if they were battery constrained before, this seems to have done a lot to alleviate that at this level. So as far as I know, there's not going to be any significant downtime in Q4, but definitely if you have any information on that, let me know. If there is not, and we continue this rate, we're at 68,000, but Tesla has been ramping up production from September through October, so there's no certainty that this production rate is going to hold through the rest of the quarter rather than continuing to increase. We also have a report from Tasmanian today, which has heard from a source that, quote, the current Model 3 production has now surpassed 5,700 units per week, end quote. We've also been talking now for quite a while about how Q4 could be the start of production for the Shanghai-made Model Y. The latest we've heard on that is that might actually happen in November, so we could even see some production from Model Y contributing to these Q4 numbers. So if we flip back to the forecasting sheet here and we look at my forecasts, I'm going to actually forecast even a little bit lower than that rumored production rate from Tasmanian. I'm going to project about a 3-4% increase for the next couple of months here in Shanghai. So I think this is relatively conservative, but this could change if there are periods of downtime or if the Model Y ramp up for some reason impacts the Model 3 production rate. But I do think this is pretty reasonable and again, hopefully a little bit conservative for Shanghai. So for November production weekly rate, I'm at about 5,350. And then for December, a couple hundred more at about 5,550. That gets me to, again, about 23,000 for November and about 24,500 for December for total Q4 production out of Shanghai at about 70,500 vehicles. Now, obviously, that's pretty high. That would be higher than Tesla's stated production capacity in the Q3 report, which they listed at 250,000. But we've already seen them beat that production rate throughout the entire month of October if the CPCA numbers are accurate. That October production rate already annualizes to about 270,000 vehicles, so they've already demonstrated a production rate above that listed capacity. For what it's worth, if Tesla can bump that production capacity up to 5,700 for November and December, that would add another couple thousand to this forecast. So these numbers for Shanghai have big implications for Q4 and for next year, but let's stick with Q4. Let's round it out by looking at Fremont production so that we can work into the total for Q4 and for the year. In Q3, Tesla produced about 145,000 vehicles in total. About 37,500 of those came from Shanghai, so that leaves a little over 107,000 that had to have come from Fremont. If we divide that by the 13.1 weeks in the quarter, that's about 8,200 per week. Beyond that, we know that Tesla produced just under 17,000 S and X. Those obviously came from Fremont, and that leaves just over 90,000 Model Y and Model 3 from Fremont produced in Q3. As we get more granular, it becomes more speculative, but based on VINs and other information out there, I have estimated that Q2 Model Y production was about 11,000 vehicles out of Fremont, and that Q3 was about 33,000, leaving the balance then for Model 3. So for Q4, based on the prior ramp up that we had seen from the Model 3, I'm estimating that Tesla can bump that Model Y production up to about 53,000 in Q4, so about 20,000 more vehicles, which if my Q2 and Q3 breakdowns are close, it'd be similar to the increase that we saw quarter to quarter there. If we look back at how the Model 3 ramp up progressed, this should be doable. In Q2 2018, Tesla produced about 28,000 Model 3s, and then in Q3 2018, about 53,000. So I'm actually showing even a less sharp increase for Model Y than what we had previously seen for the Model 3, despite Tesla having a lot more experience now and the Model Y being a similar vehicle to the Model 3. So again, I think this is pretty reasonable and hopefully even a bit conservative. As for Model 3, we have tended to see that production rate fall and then sort of flatline as Model Y has ramped up. I think one of the questions there is, okay, is that a demand thing, less demand for the Model 3 as the Model Y ramps, or is that a battery supply constraint where the Model 3 production is held back due to batteries being shifted and being used for the Model Y? I assume it's a battery supply constraint, but if it's demand, I think Tesla has pulled the levers here with the refresh, plus Q4 is always seasonally stronger. And as somebody that has ordered a Model 3 this quarter and is having to wait significantly longer than I would prefer, there certainly doesn't seem to be any demand shortage. So I think the only constraint here is likely to be batteries. For that reason, and because we're already forecasting growth for the Model Y, I'm not going to forecast much of an increase in production for the Model 3 here, only about 1% to about 58,000 from Fremont for Q4. That puts our combined Fremont Model Y and Fremont Model 3 at about 111,000 for the quarter. To me, that feels pretty good because again, in Q3, that number was about 90,000. But if we look back to Tesla's Q3 earnings report, specifically about Fremont, they said, quote, production should reach full capacity toward the end of this year or beginning of next year, end quote. The production capacity for Model 3 and Model Y out of Fremont is 500,000 per year, so that's 125,000 per quarter. If they did 90,000 in Q3 and they're trying to target 125,000 production rate at the end of Q4, well, if we just assume a linear ramp up throughout the quarter, we can just use the midpoint of those two numbers and that would give us 112,500 for Q4. Now, on one hand, they said they hope to reach that production rate by the end of the quarter or early in Q1. But on the other hand, the 90,000 production number that we used from Q3 is the total Q3 production rate. It was probably higher towards the end of the quarter. So with all that said, I think 111,000 is right in the ballpark of where Tesla could end up for Fremont, for Model Y and Model 3 in Q4. All we have left then is S and X. Tesla lists the Fremont capacity at 90,000 there. That's 22,500 per quarter. We've also seen updates this quarter. The Model S price declines. The range on the Model X has been increased. So even though Tesla has been for the last few quarters running at about 15,000 per quarter for S and X and peaking at about 18,000 last Q4, I'm expecting a decent jump here from S and X. I'm forecasting 19,000, but I do think there's potential that it could be even a bit higher. Let's just take a quick look here and then see how this all looks visually, and then we'll wrap up with the final numbers. So here we have our weekly production rates each quarter for, in blue, Fremont, and in orange, Shanghai. And in both cases, these are excluding known shutdowns that we've had from coronavirus or factory retooling, whatever the case may be. So for Q3, Shanghai ended up excluding that final 10 days at about 3,200 per week. And here for Q4, we have it projected to jump up to about 5,300 per week. But it fits pretty nicely with the linear uptrend that we have seen. And again, in September already, Tesla was producing at about 4,500 per week. So it seems extremely reasonable. And it's not unprecedented. In the past, we have seen in Fremont, Tesla increased their production rate quarter over quarter by almost 2,000 vehicles per week. That was what we talked about before with the Model 3 ramp up. So similar thing here then for Fremont. We're going from about 8,200 per week in Q3 up to about 9,900 per week in Q4, about 1,700 more per week. But again, definitely not unprecedented looking back at Tesla's history. All right, so with all that context, we'll hop back into our spreadsheet here, and all these numbers combined give me a Q4 production total, Fremont and Shanghai both, of 200,578 vehicles. I know that might sound like a lot, but again, Tesla lists their production capacity at 840,000 in the Q3 earnings report, and while the production rate doesn't necessarily equal installed capacity, we've actually seen them exceed that installed capacity listing in Shanghai in October. So if we add that 200,000 to what Tesla has already produced so far this year, that would get them to 530,000 vehicles produced for 2020. As for deliveries and whether Tesla will deliver more vehicles than they produce in Q4, I think there's a couple factors there. We have really low days of inventory, so Tesla's not working with a lot of stock. But on the other hand, they are increasing the localization of their production, which helps lower the required amount of stock because you just have less shipping time. So I'll have to spend a little bit more time thinking about that. I think it'll be relatively close to production. And with what Tesla has delivered so far year to date, they need a little over 181,000 vehicles delivered in Q4 to meet 500,000 for the year. And I think they'll exceed that by a pretty significant margin. So I'll spend a bit more time thinking about how deliveries might vary from production, but I guess for now, you can put me down for 200,000 deliveries for Q4. Let me know in the comments today what you think of this forecast, what your own forecast is, but that'll wrap it up for this episode. As always, thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up for notifications. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast. Happy Veterans Day, everybody. Thank you to those of you that have served, and I'll see you tomorrow for the Thursday, November 12th episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.